Maurice Nicole's Psychological Commentary, Volume 2, based on his work with Gurdjieff. Group meeting in Birdlip, March 10th, 1945. Commentary on the difference between the object and the thought of the object, Part 2 of 2. Through an increase in this dislike of my internal life, and so gradually strengthening it through self-observation and by sincerity with myself, my inner state may become strong enough to control my external and mechanical reacting life. This is where a man begins to work on himself without showing much external change. For example, I can not pretend to myself that I can alter the reactions of my false personality just like that. But if I observe them in the light of the work with any sincerity, I begin to dislike them. Then I begin to struggle with my thoughts and feelings privately. That is, I begin to work on myself, my inner life. Mechanically, I may take pleasure in disliking some person whom I see visibly in front of me, but after a time, I take no such similar pleasure in thinking how I dislike this person. The reason is because I begin to be aware of my inner or psychological life, that is, the life of thought and feeling that I have become aware of through self-observation, in which, so to speak, I am trying to arrange in a right way in the light of the work. When I am in that state of insight, I will continually suffer from myself, from Nicole and this his mechanical reactions, and in a certain sense, have to endure this external mechanical reacting person that hitherto I have taken as myself, but which, as the work has gradually shown me, I must separate from. At the time my personality reacts, I will no doubt feel quite justified. But from this deeper and more internal part that is beginning to awaken, I will feel uncomfortable and will certainly take no pleasure in going with the thoughts of Nicole or with his feelings that have been called forth by some momentary irritation. And so gradually, by the growth of something internal to Nicole, in my case, I may sometimes actually feel that something for me is beginning at times, but only at times, to be stronger than this machinery that dislikes a person right off, like that. I will no longer be so prone to agree with Nicole and with the judgments of Nicole. To be alone with oneself and indulge in negative feelings and enjoy unpleasant thoughts about other people will no longer commend itself to me as a good way to live in myself. When I am alone with myself, I will have to review myself as to what has been going on in my centers and examine myself from the standpoint of what eyes have charge of me in the momentary heat of my mechanical intercourse with life, when I've been completely identified with each passing event, each typical circumstance. The pleasure of reacting mechanically will no longer give me satisfaction, though it may give Nicole great satisfaction. And when I examine myself in this way, when I am alone with myself, I can only do so rightly when I review myself from this standpoint of all the work teaches about being identified, about being negative, about making internal accounts, about judging, about lying about myself, justifying, and above all, about remembering to remember oneself. When I submit myself to the work and the solitariness of myself in this way, I will dislike thinking with pleasure of people that I hate. I will not take pleasure in my thoughts, although I may find it difficult not to take pleasure in disliking the person when I see him. It has been said by some philosopher that of no mean standing that religion consists in what you do in the solitariness of yourself. To get up in the morning after having indulged in all sorts of unpleasant thoughts and feelings about other people is not a good way to start the day, as a good many of us know by this inner taste. But the strengthening of this internal side, which wishes to grow if we have any work eyes in us, depends on this inner sincerity with oneself that the work speaks about so much. For example, if I can never see I have lied, I would agree with Nicole, namely my external side, my false personality, and I justify myself. I cannot have any depth in my observation, and the internal side of me cannot possibly grow, in which case there can never be anything stronger than Nicole. I do not mean, as I explained, that I can deal with Nicole straight away, but I can begin to suffer from him myself privately, and will suffer in the right way. And please note this: only if I observe the reactions of Nicole in the light of the work, if I begin to do this, I will find it possible for me to separate from a great many thoughts and feelings that Nicole takes pleasure in, but which something more deeply placed in me takes no pleasure in at all. To dislike oneself is useless and only gives rise to illness and depression. But in my case, to begin to see and dislike the reactions of Nicole and to separate from them, and so not to regard myself as Nicole, can give result. That is why the work emphasizes so much that we must break ourselves up into many different parts and not take ourselves as one, as unity, which imaginary I causes us to assume. You cannot change yourself if you take yourself as yourself, and all attempts to do this will lead to a dangerous situation. You have to be able to say to yourself, I am not this I am not that I. Or again, you must be able to say, I am not this thought that comes to me, or I will not take pleasure in thinking or feeling in this way. It may only be possible to do this for a short time, but I assure you that if you manage to do it only for a short time and only from time to time, gradually something more internal will develop in you that may be actually able to take charge of you occasionally and control the reactions of the external mechanical side. Some people think that change is something that takes place finally and irrevocably by a few moments of work, and they get upset if they do not get results. But this is quite wrong conception of what the work means. The whole point lies in how you recover from falling. And it is always interesting to notice how people recover from a bad state, because here lies the work at first, in this learning to walk instead of always falling, because we are like little children learning to walk, and if we never fell, we could never learn. To resume, it is on our thoughts, on how we think and feel, that the center of gravity of our work falls. So if we take pleasure in thoughts as to how we dislike, as taking pleasure in disliking the object transmitted by our senses, confronted by some object that you take pleasure in disliking, there may be such a mechanical reaction that you cannot prevent it. But you can prevent the thoughts afterward as to how you dislike the object. And it is here at this point that all the work lies. Here, for example, lie such thoughts as, can you find anything similar in yourself to what you take pleasure in disliking in this other person? Have you noticed how you behave? Have you noticed what impressions you give to other people? And so on endlessly. We are trying to build up a psychological internal order in ourselves arranged by the influence of the work, a delicate organism built up, so to speak, of thoughts and feelings, of right connections, of right associations, a psychological organism that begins to put us in touch with higher centers, a psychological body. When we begin to realize this, we cannot afford to indulge in such things as taking pleasure in thinking how we dislike other people. Why? Because in that case, we are building up a negative psychological organism that will conduct everything in the wrong way, in which there is no truth and nothing good. Many people crystallize out in their negative emotions. I advise you to avoid such people. The point then is to see clearly the difference between a sensation and a thought. You see in front of you a person you do not like because of his clothes, his voice, his manner, and you take pleasure in disliking this object while looking at it, that is, while your senses transmit his image to you. Afterwards, when you no longer see this person, you take pleasure in thinking how you dislike this person. The Sufi teacher says that the effect on you is the same. The two things are different, but one being an object and the other the thought about the object. Because to see a person who is present and to think about a person who is absent is not the same thing. A different center is being employed, but the dislike in both cases is the same.